Did you know that nonprofit organizations raise an aggregate of $3.7 trillion every year? Yes, that's 3.7 trillion with 11 zeros. The growth of nonprofits throughout the last decade has been undeniable, and with students at this own school starting their own, they encounter problems and misconceptions people hold about their nonprofit organizations. To talk about this predicament, we have today's guest, Lila Goldin, who is a cover staffer on the Muse and marketing and recruitment coordinator of Philanthropy Tank, which is a nonprofit that aims to empower the next generation of changemakers through funding and mentorship to create their own community betterment initiatives. She's also the president of nonprofit organization Sharing the Arts, which aids underserved elementary students in arts education. This is Muse Talks, the Overhead Myth. Obviously, you've been involved with nonprofits throughout most of your high school tenure. What have you noticed about the way people perceive nonprofits?
It's a great question. So I've been really motivated to be a part of the nonprofit scene in Palm Beach County, especially because at Dreyfus, we're really encouraged to think about giving back. We've been so blessed to have the opportunity to be here, and through working not just with Philanthropy Tank as their marketing and recruitment coordinator, but also as a leader of my own nonprofit in the community, it's been really easy to notice misconceptions people hold about nonprofits, like you said. And I was invited to go to a talk with humanitarian and nonprofit advocate Dan Pelota about a year ago when he came to discuss this concept that he created, which is called the overhead myth. And it's about why the way that society views nonprofits is wrong. And I'm really excited to get into that. So Dan Pelota basically invented the multi-day charitable event. So things like AIDS rides, the breast cancer 3-day walks, things like that, which were things that nonprofit leaders would not have even been able to conceptualize because strictly by the nature of being a nonprofit organization, these kinds of huge events are really just out of reach. They require so much funding and advertising and supplies. Just the scale in general is something you would think of more so when it comes to a business or a for-profit company rather than a nonprofit. And so he discussed a lot about why nonprofits are really forced to descale, to be able to reach fewer people because of this concept of overhead. So the best way to understand it is when you are, say you are a philanthropist, okay? Mabruk, you are a philanthropist, all right? And you want to donate $1 million to a local hunger charity, okay? What do you want your money to go towards?
I want it to go towards solving hunger.
Right, towards feeding people, feeding families. And so you want to be able to say, not just to yourself, but also to maybe it's a business donation, things like that. My money fed X amount of families. You know what I mean? My money fed X amount of children. You know what I mean? Or if you're donating to a company that is doing malaria vaccinations internationally, you want to be able to say, my money helped these many kids avoid disease, right? And of course that's understandable, and that's what you are taught to donate in order so that this organization can reach their goal. However, no organization can put all of the money into actual action, right? And so that's where the idea of overhead comes from. You need to pay someone to organize these events and programming, etc. You need supplies, you need fundraising, etc. In order to get more donors, you need to advertise, right? And so people want to say, my money went towards feeding these families, vaccinating these children. They don't want to say, my money paid the CEO. You know what I mean? But
100%.
That's just as important, right? Because without leadership, you can't actually succeed in those projects, in the goal of the nonprofit, which is where it comes back around to Dan Pelota's inventions of these AIDS rides and the breast cancer 3-day walks. These projects of scale need massive amounts of overhead money, right? And local nonprofits, especially what I've seen with Philanthropy Tank and my work with Sharing the Arts and et cetera, the scale is just, it's not going to be like that, not only because of financial limitations, but of societal expectation. So it's all the money that you're making is supposed to go towards a goal, which obviously in an ideal world it would. But realistically, if a for-profit company like Sephora, that's obviously my example, is able to market all of these products towards potential quote unquote donors, but really just customers, right? Obviously, they're going to get more business than a hunger charity that is not able to advertise like what they're doing. Fewer donors will even know that they exist, know what they're capable of doing, right? And so then there's also that idea of like, should a nonprofit spend money on advertising, right? Like it seems abnormal, but actually that's how they're able to, in the end, help more people.
I think it makes sense. I think especially when nonprofits account for almost 13 million jobs in the entire country and 7.2% of all jobs in Florida itself, like all these people need to get paid somehow. And if you're going to be like, I want my money not to go to these people, because then people aren't going to work for nonprofits, and nonprofits are not going to be effective.
I actually have something that I'd love to share about that, especially in an area like Palm Beach, which is like a global wealth hub. I mean, people are calling Palm Beach like South Wall Street at this point. There's a lot of charity happening in this area. And something that I like to look at is a few years ago, Business Week did a survey and looked at the compensation packages for MBAs 10 years out of business school, specifically Stanford Business School. And the median compensation for a Stanford MBA with bonus by 38 was $400,000.
Wow.
Right? Okay. Meanwhile, same year, average salary for a CEO of a $5 million plus medical charity in the U.S. was $232,000.
So less than half.
Right, and for a hunger charity, $84,000. And so when you think about getting people to work in the nonprofit sector, logically, there's no way you're going to tell someone who has $400,000 talent to make a $316,000 sacrifice every year to be the CEO of a hunger charity. And actually, it's cheaper for that person to donate $100K every year to the hunger charity, save $50,000 on their taxes, be ahead of the game, and then now be called a philanthropist and probably sit on the board of the hunger charity and tell that person what to do, right? And so it's like thinking, what is going to motivate someone, the best talent, the people who are really going to be able to promote this nonprofit's goals and achieve their like nonprofit dreams, right, of helping people, if you're telling them they're going to make, roughly a quarter of what they could be making and then be bossed around by someone who has the same like level of talent as they do, right? And the statistic was taken like directly from Dan Pallotta's speech, because I think it's so poignant. Like if you look at it straight, like statistically, it doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? And because people, especially like I said, in our home county, in our home city, are so motivated like about charity and giving, you don't often think about, well, who are the people who are putting these plans into action, like the leaders of these nonprofits, right? Mm-hmm. Through Philanthropy Tank, like you introduced earlier, we work with high school students who are interested in founding and leading their own community betterment initiatives. So it's giving them practice in like, you are going to be a nonprofit leader in your community at this young age, and you are going to be able to help communities that maybe adults wouldn't be able to, right? Like because you have a different worldview, different mindset. And I've spoken with students who have graduated through the Philanthropy Tank program, went off to college, and said, like, oh, is this something that you want to go into, like, in the future? And they're like, no. You know, a lot of them are, like, looking into finance, investment banking, like, things that are going to be able to give them the salary that they would then be able to donate to nonprofit organizations, or rather retire early and then lead one. You know what I mean? And so even though we are implementing like these nonprofit programs for high schoolers, and especially like there's been this huge growth, like you mentioned earlier, in high schoolers leading their own nonprofit programs, I don't know if that's necessarily going to lead to a correlation in more people going into the nonprofit sector when they are older, even if they are doing it more at this young age. Because like we were discussing, there's that whole myth about nobody wants to pay the leader of a nonprofit to lead a nonprofit. They only want that money to go towards helping people. But you can help people at a grander, larger scale if you have that talent, if you have that advertising ability, things like that, you know?
Yeah, you kind of just got into it with Philanthropy Tank and how students tend to leave that field. But how has it affected the way you run Sharing the Arts, or how have you seen it affect how other people run their nonprofit?
Right. So I guess circling back to empirics, because I think that's like the easiest way to quantify this effect. If you look at charitable giving in the United States, right? I mean, wealth has just like exploded in the United States. Yet charitable giving has remained 2% of the GDP for over 4 decades. So this is like all this money, charitable giving has remained the same percent of our GDP. And so but when you think about it, how could the nonprofit sector take market share away from the for-profit sector if it can't market, it can't advertise? And also there's that same idea of the time aspect. Like, I think this is for sure a big deal with Philanthropy Tank because you're working with high schoolers. And I mean, we graduate, right? Like, you fund a nonprofit their junior year, they have 1 year to make things happen fast, right? Versus a for-profit company where you have time to give it a shot. If it doesn't work, you're back to the drawing board. You know what I mean? However, in the nonprofit sector, there's this expectation, like, if I'm putting my money in to your program, I want to see some kind of result quick. Like, I want to see some kind of growth, some kind of change. And again, this is all understandable, but just when you look at it and you really compare it to the for-profit sector, it's such a disadvantage, you know? And when we look at, like, from my perspective, obviously I'm not a professional nonprofit worker, you know? Like, I'm a high school student that's been working in the nonprofit sector, like, as a volunteer for 4 years now. And from what I've seen, I think the time aspect affects us most of all, because if you can't do something fast, you graduate, you run out of time, your program, like, other things, schoolwork, they pile on top and it becomes forgotten about. When we look at that misconception and how we can prove that wrong, like, not asking about the size of their overhead costs, or, you know, what kind of time has to go into marketing a program, you know, making a curriculum, especially if it's an education nonprofit, which a lot of the times for high school students it is, and just developing, like, a really rock solid budget, a plan, and instead of asking about, like, well, why has it been 6 months since we funded you and we haven't seen immediate, like, statistics that can prove you are making a change. Ask, like, what do you hope to achieve? Like, what are your end goals with this program? How can we help you reach those? Like, where do you see this going? Longevity, like, you know what I mean? And that's why at Philanthropy Tank we always try to teach about succession plans. I'm a successor. Sharing the Arts was started initially by my brother. Shout out Nate Goldin, Dreyfus class of 24. But I took that over and then am able to continue that mission. So I think it's a lot about the way we look at nonprofits. How can we change the way we're seeing it? Not right now at this moment, but looking to the future. Like, what are your goals? What are your dreams, you know?
It's kind of that patience thing. Like, I think today, in today's world, patience is lacking everywhere, like, throughout.
That's for sure.
Every industry or sector and all that, like, especially in sports and now nonprofits and in school. Like, people aren't, they don't understand the importance of, you know, sticking with something and being dedicated to something because they don't see that instant gratification.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's kind of what's impacting nonprofits across the world.
For sure.
Enacting any change.
If you look, okay, I'm going to bring up another statistic just because I think these are super interesting and they help you visualize, like, how this is actually impacting the entire sector. Since 1970, and this is, I'm not going to say this is, like, updated to today, but this is another statistic that Dan likes to draw on. Since 1970, approximately 144, 150 nonprofits have crossed the $50 million annual revenue barrier. Yet in the same amount of time, over 46,000 for-profit businesses have surpassed that mark. That's a crazy difference.
Almost 300 times.
Right. That's quick math. That's just a crazy difference. And that's, like, a way to visualize, like, this is not a small scale, something that a couple people are noticing. This is huge. This is across the whole world. The nonprofit sector is experiencing this. It's this kind of slow growth, kind of sluggish because of these reasons. Despite the fact that wealth is growing, people want to give to charity, but like I said, they want to give to charity in order for that money, like I said in the beginning, to go towards something. You got to think about long term. And I think if we start shifting that mindset, we'll see that number of nonprofits to really cross that $50 million annual revenue barrier explode, because you're allowed to think big, you know?
Yeah, just, piggybacking off that, what you just said. Lila Goldin, you're the president of the world. You get to change what people think.
Okay.
How do we get people to realize that overhead isn't something that should be like thrown away or scoffed at? How do we get people to realize the importance of it?
Like convincing people to understand anything, you have to start small. I love the statistics, but when you just throw big abstract numbers in people's faces, a lot of the times it can feel overwhelming and too much to take on at once. But if you give them an example of one charity, one nonprofit, like Dan Pallotta's AIDS rides, like that's an instance of one person thinking big, and they absolutely like quintupled the amount of not only awareness, but also the actual revenue that they could raise to make change and meet their goals. If you can look at it small first, then people can understand, maybe the way I am looking at nonprofits is wrong. Like, look at them as a business. Like, helping people is a business, right? As much as it is a charity, right? You have to think about it like that. And so in a business, you have to appeal to consumers. In a nonprofit, you have to appeal to donors, And I think using that instance of the Stanford MBA, what you can make out, 10 years out of business school, working for profit versus working in a hunger charity or, a medical charity. When you look at it like that, small scale, it helps you visualize, this is bigger than I thought it was. This is a real problem. And like you described it, it's a myth, that idea of the fact that overhead is bad. It's something that, you should frown upon, like keep overhead low. Obviously, yes, you don't want to be corrupt in the way that the leaders of your nonprofit are making more money than the actual like change is being occurred, and then those people don't have the goal of you know what I mean? That's wrong. That's not what I'm advocating.
Becomes a for-profit.
That's not what I'm advocating for here. But what I'm saying is, like, overhead, when used properly and taken advantage of in the right way, actually can manifest in greater change, in helping more people, right? That's why I think this is something that everybody should think about, and why it's something that I'm so passionate about.
Yeah, I think it's a really important issue that does need to be talked about more, especially during this time where you see so many high schoolers making their own nonprofits. So thank you, Lila. I think that's all we have for today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you for being just so knowledgeable and so passionate about this area.
I hope that this was able to change one person's mind and shift the way that they view nonprofits.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Lila, and we'll see you guys on the next episode of Muse Talks.